All right. Uh, Welcome, everyone, to the 2020 FEBT virtual reunion. I can't say that I've heard anyone out there saying that they enjoy our new normal, but we can choose to be excellent in spite of it. And this gathering today is proof of that. I'd like to start by thanking the many people who have been helping me in the past several months to plan this event. In fact, in many cases, I didn't even need to ask, they came forward on their own. I'd like to start with the great group of speakers here today for the event. They were all quick to offer their support and help, and we're glad to have them along. And I think we're in for some enlightening and fantastic talk today. Uh, I'd also like to thank Brad Esposito, the railroad's new general manager, who has been very accommodating along the way and has offered several ideas and tips to help make this year's reunion quite fantastic. Andy Van Syok, the FEBT president, from which I inherited uh, the coordinator responsibility, is always quick to help and offer a hand when I need it. Dave Phillips, our store manager, he has really come through for us this year. We put quite a burden on him with the online registrations and adding these new complex items to the company store, which he then quickly had to undo and send many of you attending today a refund. Dave's a great guy and adds a very valuable service to our group. Pete and Jane Clark, who have been also quite helpful in their efforts to get Robertsdale kick-started this year. We had great plans down there, and I was in constant contact with them to plan the event, and really was going to be something truly spectacular taking place in Robertsdale, and there will be in the future. Uh, there's countless others that have helped me along the way here. I obviously don't have time to mention them all, but I thank them all, and it's been great. This was quite a year to be planning all this. It was very exciting, getting to quite a fever pitch right up until, and here we are today. But from those ashes rose a new group of volunteers, the techno jockeys that would mount up and corral all of our virtual might that we could muster to create today's event. I'd like to thank this group who are your hosts and co-hosts today. Although we are not riding steel horses today, there is one thing that I can assure you all. We will have that opportunity soon in the future, in the coming year, because Brad Esposito and the foundation are an unstoppable force. Due to them and the countless volunteers who dedicated their time, sweat, and money over the years, the East Broad Top will not fade into history, but will continue to make history for generations to come. Um, Let me explain a little bit now how the call is going to work today. We ask that all of our guests remain unmuted. I believe you actually don't have permission to unmute yourself, but in times that you may need to speak, permission will be granted. Every segment will be followed by a short Q&A session. We ask that you submit your questions for these Q&A sessions via the chat function in Zoom. There is one of our hosts, Chris Coleman, who will be taking these questions. Please, you can submit them to everyone because I believe that only will submit to co-hosts, but you could also address Chris directly. Submit your questions to him. He will be tallying them up and asking our speakers later on during the Q&A sessions. There will be a 10-minute break between each of our segments today so that you can get something to drink, stretch your legs, and otherwise there'll be a slide up during that break. If you begin to hear any noise, go ahead and get back because it will be about to begin. And with that, I believe that's everything we have to cover before the meeting. And it's now my pleasure to introduce to you all a true stalwart for railroads and for railroad history around the world, the East Broad Top Foundation Chairman, Henry Posner.
Okay, thank you all for the opportunity to talk. What I thought I would do is talk for 20 minutes, maybe less, and then try to leave as many minutes as possible toward the back end for Q&A. As far as how that Q&A process will go, it's my understanding that using the chat feature, some questions will go to the moderator, who will then sanitize them and send me only the softball questions. And after that, it'll be more of a free-for-all where anybody can put their hand up and ask me anything they want. So it's going to be kind of like a hybrid between a CSX short line conference and a Norfolk Southern short line conference. So first and foremost, what I'd like to do is thank the Friends of the East Broad Top for everything that you've done. Typically in nonprofit organizations, the first thing a funder wants to hear about is what is the sweat equity investment of the organization. And what you have done over not just the years, but the decades, I'm sure there is a precedent for it, but the fact that you would spend decades stabilizing and improving somebody else's railroad in the hope that there would be a solution in the long term kind of stretches the definition of what volunteer organizations have been able to achieve. I pride myself in my knowledge of railroad history, and in fact, I teach a course at Carnegie Mellon on railroad deregulation, which by definition includes a bunch of railroad history, but I scratch my head when I try to come up with analogies for other organizations similar to the Friends. Yeah, the Coomers and Toltec has had the Friends, which is, I think, a peer organization in some respects, but they came along in parallel with the evolution of the Coomers and Toltec. And in the UK, you've got the Festiniog, but that was basically a Friends organization that was the same as the owner operator. So I know that there are lots of people on this call. And so to the extent that many of you have an interest in rail history, if you can come up with a historic analogy, I'd sure like to hear about it, because unless you educate me otherwise, and I consider myself a student of railroad history as much as an educator, I love to be straightened out. On the Iowa Interstate, whenever we start a move, we have a job briefing. And as chairman, my job is basically to stay out of the way and try not to get hurt, which would be very embarrassing. But what I always like to say is, remember, there is no I in Iowa Interstate, which of course is a completely incorrect statement because there are two I's in Iowa Interstate and people are quick to correct me. So given all of the intellectual firepower on this group today, if you can straighten me out, that'll be appreciated. So there are three things that I was asked to talk about. One is how the board came together. Second, what's the overall vision? And three, what drew me in personally. And I will start with the question of how the board came together. So it's basically, as most things happen, it was a confluence of events. A lot of things have been going on all at the same time. But first and foremost, for me, it was meeting Stefan Lane in the cab of the Everett Railroad steam locomotive about 5 years ago and being impressed that somebody at his age was doing so much. And we stayed in touch over the years. He actually came and talked to my class at Carnegie Mellon. And when he said that there is, in fact, something serious going on, that brought me to contact with Brad Esposito, knowledge about what the group was up to. We wound up sitting in Joe Kowalczyk's office, and a lot of things happened all at once. And I would argue that they all happened at once because they were all building toward a crescendo about the same time. The ongoing concern, and I do not want to speak for the Kowalczyk family, but they carried the torch for 2 generations. And it was, on the one hand, a historic legacy, and on the other hand, a burden. And so I think what we came up with was something which honored the Kowalczyk legacy in a very appropriate way. The torch has been passed. The Kowalczyk family remains heavily connected. Joe Kowalczyk is a board member, but there are a lot of other things that happened all at once. For example, when Wick Moorman casually mentioned to me that if anything ever happened with the East Broadtop, he'd really like to be involved. So within the space of several months, it all came together. And for many of you, on February 14th, that was when it came together all in the same place at the same time. I'll just add one more thing, which is who's the board? And in addition to being a student of railroads, I also consider myself a student of governance. I've spent a lot of time on independent school governance and serve on the national board of the Independent School Chairpersons Association. So governance is a really interesting thing for me. And I think it's all about the board, and what you need for good governance is a diverse board of people who bring complementary skills together and still work in a way that's manageable, because in a volunteer organization, you can't fire volunteers, right? So nonprofit governance is different than for-profit governance. So the board, I would argue, is very carefully constructed with 3 basic components. One are the people from the original group with the plan and the vision. And so it was 3, 3, and 3, 3 members from each segment. So that group, the current board members in that group are Brad Esposito, David Brightbill, and Lawrence B. Miller. And then you've got the industry group, which is Wick Moorman, Bennett Levin, who needs no introduction. Probably nobody is more personally identified with the history of the Pennsylvania Railroad, who's alive, than Bennett Levin. And he's also probably, nobody has made a more of a personal financial commitment to that history, as evidenced by his train. And then third being myself. So you got 3 industry people. And then what we've tried to do is build out the board with people from the outside world. And Jane Sheffield, executive director of the Allegheny Ridge Corporation, a nonprofit organization based in Altoona, whose mission is economic development, is ideally suited to bringing to the board real world outside experience and things like fundraising, government relations, et cetera. And of course, Joe Kowalczyk. So the Kowalczyk family legacy is represented on the board. And we may expand the board, but at this point, we're functioning pretty well. We've got board committees going on, and I believe that those results are visible to the extent that the railroad is back on its feet already. I had a significant birthday in August. I turned 65, and on my 65th birthday, I rode the first ballast train on the East Broad Top. Had to get up pretty early for that one, but it was definitely worthwhile. And all I can say is if you look on our website, rrdc.com, you'll also see how I spent my 50th birthday, which was the dismantling of the Chaucha line in Peru. I always wanted to ride that line. And so on my birthday, I rode the first train going up the branch line to begin the take-up job. So, if David P. Morgan were alive today, I'm sure he would come up with some extremely eloquent way of describing the symbolism and all that. All I can say is that I'm very happy to be involved in a rebirth, and probably an unlikely a rebirth as one might think, because think of all the bad things that could have happened. Starting with the shops could have burned down, on down. So again, I'm very proud to be involved in this group, which would not have come together was it not for the Kowalczyks, the other board members, and the omnipresence of the friends for so long, whose sweat equity is a big piece of the eternal balance sheet of the East Broad Top Railroad. So now let's talk about the overall vision. And I would have to say in that regard, what I'm trying to do as one of the board members, and this is a diverse board, the basic vision is to stabilize things and put things back like they were in 1956 eventually, with some changes, going to Joler, because that's a scenic location that hasn't seen a train since way before 56. That's one of the goals that we have. But I would not want to talk too much about the details, because I think that on the one hand, we've tried to underpromise and overdeliver, but the other is I think that there are a lot of different directions that we can go, and it really depends on a number of factors, including what the overall environment for funding, what the overall consensus is among the various constituencies as to what we do and where. Any number of possibilities. One would be, let's go back to 1956. And let's face it, there are some aspects of 1956 that one would not necessarily want to replicate today. Two, well, let's become the World Narrow Gauge Museum, which is probably not right either, because you could wind up with a collection that might actually overwhelm the EBT. So there are a lot of possibilities out there, and I think that we need to be disciplined and thoughtful in terms of how we proceed with this. What drew me in? A lot of things, mostly personal, ranging from the number of times we've been screwed in the state of Pennsylvania, most famously being the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie, where the Department of Environmental Resources came after us and said we would retroactively be criminals if we saved the company for environmental reasons. Needless to say, all the pollution's still there, all the jobs are gone, and unless you dug really, really deeply, nobody would know we ever tried. Two, the Steel City Flyer, our ill-fated attempt to run a express bus across the state to connect with Amtrak. So in some respects, it's kind of a way to vindicate ourselves. But the point is, we originally set out to be a company doing business in Pennsylvania with a P&LE, and didn't work out that way. So right now we're in Iowa, Peru, Germany, France, and the UK. We used to be in Guatemala, Mozambique, Malawi, and Estonia. Well, we started out, we wanted to be a Pennsylvania company, but that was not an option for us. So I'm glad to be back. And the neat thing about Pennsylvania is that it's my grandfather's roots. He was a signal maintainer for the Pennsylvania at Blairsville on the Conemaugh line. So as I make my way from Pittsburgh to Rockhill, I basically pass through his territory, and it's nice to be a generation skipping railroader with his legacy. It's also good to see things happening in central Pennsylvania from a historic perspective, given all the tragedy that has surrounded Altoona, ranging from the demolition of the test plant to the destruction of their downtown. Altoona has been pretty sad for the last generation, and I'm glad to see things, good things happening in parallel with the Railroads Memorial Museum, and how all of a sudden central Pennsylvania starts to look like Wales, where you've got a bunch of rail-centric attractions, and you've got a critical mass going on that can drive tourism. Because let's face it, there's not a lot of tourism in central Pennsylvania, which I think is a shame because there's so many neat places. I love Huntington, and just enjoy the time I spend in EBT territory. And then finally, it's a narrow gauge railroad, and we were one of the bigger 3-foot gauge railroads in Guatemala, 200-mile narrow gauge railroad, Baldwin steam locomotives, very much like the EBT. The tragedy of that company was a national tragedy, and in the case of the EBT, it's nice to see the revival of a 3-foot gauge railroad. My wife's a Newfoundlander by descent. Both of her parents are Newfoundlanders. The tragedy of the Newfoundland Railway is another story. And of course, we were narrow gauge railroaders in Malawi and Mozambique. Malawi was railroading in the Garden of Eden. So all this stuff, by the way, if this interests you, there's a book, Railroaders Without Borders, Indiana University Press. I didn't write it, therefore it's not propaganda, but just go to our website, rrdc.com. At any rate, back to the, let's stay on topic and talk about the EBT. I really am honored to be able to do something in my home state, Pennsylvania. Last time we tried again, that was the P&LE. And I'm honored to be serving with such a dedicated and interesting group of people. Let me just add that one of the things that I think is interesting and important is the number of young people that I've seen out and about involved in the project. Not all rail preservation organizations have the diversity of age that I've seen, at least on what I've seen at the work sessions and people I've interacted with on the railroad. And it's encouraging to see a lot of young people having the interest. I think we as an industry have done ourselves a disservice by criminalizing interest in railroads. I think that a lot of people who are active in the industry got started with museums and things like that, and see us as a gateway for future industry leaders through what we're doing on the EBT. So all of that being said, I think I have exhausted my list of things that I have been asked to talk about. So with that, why don't we go to the first part of the Q&A, the censored questions, and then at some point we can morph to the free-for-all.
Scarlett, can you unmute me? Or spotlight me, I'm sorry. For the group here, we'll be having the so-called censored questions here posed. And then when we get to the free questions, what we're going to have everybody do is, if you would like to ask a question, probably towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a reactions category. Within there is a thumbs up. If you give us a thumbs up, the co-hosts will know that Henry has posted one there. Chris Coleman also has one up. If we have a thumbs up, we'll know that you're looking to ask a question, and the co-host can then go ahead and unmute you. And be aware that if you have video on and you unmute yourself and you talk, you will be seen by the group. So either choose to have your video on or not, but be aware that that is a possibility when you speak. And you should become visible, ask your question. Once you've asked your question, you will be remuted, and then Henry can go ahead and answer your question. So, but we will go ahead and start with the questions that have been submitted through chat so far. So let's go ahead with the first question. Thank you.
Okay, so we haven't received very many so far. The first one is, excuse me, is the America Industrial Heritage Project still viable and involved in any way with the EBT Foundation?
To be honest with you, I'm not familiar with that.
I believe that dates from 89, 90, where the National Park Service came in. They did some work. They did a lot of documentation and that sort of thing. And I don't believe there's any involvement at this point. Is that correct, Henry?
Yes, though I think that's very much aligned with the intent. Because keep in mind, the EBT is really at least two separate things. One is the railroad and the workshops. So we've got something with the workshops, which is completely different from almost every railroad museum. I mean, even the Durango and Silverton does not have what we have. So the workshops require a special type of approach, which is parallel but different. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about that, because I think that somebody interested in industrial heritage would not necessarily be a railroad enthusiast. But that's definitely something that is so far into the forefront of our thinking that we're trying to think, maybe at the board level, we need some expertise on industrial heritage. But we have reached out to peer organizations that have things like workshops, and that's an active and high priority item for the board. So if we succeed in that and creating something which is industrial heritage, and by the way, if Altoona had kept the test plant, imagine what that would be like, then we will have accomplished the goal. And you won't necessarily need somebody at the national level pushing all the buttons, because it'll happen naturally. People will gravitate to the EBT as part of an industrial heritage zone, which might include things like Pittsburgh, where you've got the Carey furnace and stuff like that.
Okay, our next question. This probably would have been a better question for Brad if he were here, but we'll go with it anyway. What is the condition of the railroad infrastructure south of Rockhill, contrary to any hearsay or rumor mills?
Well, it's all there. It just got trees growing through it. The rails are all there. There are virtually no ties at all. But what you've got are rails and trees. And it should be a pretty straightforward rehab job, except of course for the bridges, which are going to need some work. The first tunnel is in not as bad condition as the second tunnel. So it's all, the most important thing is there's an unbroken right-of-way. And Joe Kowalczyk has been extremely thorough in perfecting the right of the railroad to remain a railroad. So the single biggest barrier would be, property disputes and something like that, things like that. We do not believe that there are significant problems out there. So the main question is, how long will it take to get the railroad back by doing all the ties, fixing the bridges, and at least one tunnel.
Okay, our next question. What safeguards are in place to prevent the restoring of the East Broad Top from damaging its historic fabric?
That's a gray area because it depends on what your definition of historic fabric is. I mean, I think there are two extremes. One is, let's go back to 1956, exactly as it was. Or should we go back to the 1920s? There are a lot of compromises that are going to have to be made. All I can say is that nobody would be involved in this project if we were looking to Disneyfy or seriously destroy the historic fabric. I think we all understand the historic legacy that we've been given. That being said, this is the 21st century, and there are things that we have to do to accommodate life in this century. For example, a wheelchair lift. So there are lots of compromises, and these are typical challenges for historic organizations. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, our next question. How does the foundation envision the East Broad Top as an educational asset?
Well, one aspect would be try to get school groups to come. And the other is, and that would be for younger people. But the other would be the opportunity, I think, for people to actually work on the railroad, pick up a lot of the skills. I think most of the people working on historic railroads today started as teenagers and have spent their life in the industry. That is one obvious educational spin-off benefit of what we're doing. But the more traditional approach is you get things ranging from school groups to adult continuing education. We're all lifelong learners, and I would argue that everything about the East Broad Top is educational. So what you have to do is get people to come to Rockhill so that they can be enlightened. That's all of our jobs.
Okay, I think we're trying to keep it to 5 questions, so I think one more. And I'm going to kind of expand upon this one a bit. Is the foundation looking to acquire any additional properties on sites along the line in order to provide a destination? The specific question mentioned Saltillo Y and other areas. So I guess, are you looking to go beyond the right-of-way to make a destination for the railroad south of Rockhill?
The right-of-way is, I believe, sufficient for most of the things that we might want to do. I would rather evade that question because it really is a case-by-case basis. You've got the footprint of the stations and things like that, and that should be adequate for most purposes. But I'd rather stop there because, to be honest with you, as the plan develops, it may turn out that there are things that we should be looking at. But at this point, it's not like we're looking to get into the real estate business or anything like that. The other thing is, you can partner with local organizations, and some of these, if there are prospects, for example, for building something that starts to look like a tourist destination on the line at various points, maybe better off working with local organizations or even for-profit entities. It really depends on what the opportunity is. So I hope that's not too evasive, but that's about as specific as I can get because that's my level of understanding.
Okay, Randy, I think this is a good time to go to the freestyle type questions.
Sounds good. So as we've said before, anybody who would like to pose a question at this point directly themselves may go ahead and give us a thumbs up, and the co-hosts will unmute you.
Oh, and do me a favor, and when you ask the question, tell me what your day job is, and so I can understand a little bit about who you are, because it's really interesting to me, the composition of the friends. So this will be a learning opportunity for me.
Hello there. Hello.
Go ahead.
Am I on?
Yes, you are, Eric. Go right ahead.
Good day. My name is Eric Schmanke. I am currently 19 years old. I've been a fan of the East Broad Top ever since I was a small child. I've been closely following what you guys have been doing. But fun fact, I actually did a business plan on the East Broad Top for senior year of high school for an entrepreneurship course. The question I want to ask is actually, do you guys have a plan for the schedule for next year? Like, you have any events planned, like Day Out with Thomas or Santa Claus trains, which I bet you guys actually do probably.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for asking a question, because some people like to make statements, you know, as in disguised as a question, but thank you for that very good question. I think the answer is yes to everything that you've said. It's what we want to do, what we're able to do, taking that step by step. But yeah, the things that you've described are typical tourist railroad things. Thomas has not been discussed. There's some licensing issues involved in that. I think we've been pretty good at doing homegrown things our own way. And the workshops allow us to do things our own way. So we should be doing seasonal stuff the EBT way, which probably is going to involve a combination of the EBT Railroad, the EBT workshops, and the Rockhill Trolley Museum. Thanks.
I think Jay Craigthorpe had a question. It's
Yeah.
kind of hard to scroll through everybody here, so just bear with us.
Yeah. Hi, Craig. Nice
Okay.
to see you. And
Thank you, Henry. Good day. You know who I am. I'm a railway artist, so I'm coming from that background and present action, and the fact that East Broad Top was a major part of my life as a teenager and young fellow. Henry, a quick question. What are the plans or discussions for the north end of the line, north of Shirleysburg?
there are none. Too complicated.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into that because it's a can of worms. And we are at this point focused on going south because we can control that. And by the way, I've got your book on my bookshelf behind me, Solutionary Rail. So I just don't want to hijack it, show everybody that I've actually got your book in my bookcase here.
Am I good to ask my question now? Oh, hang on.
Go ahead, please.
All right. First off, Henry, appreciate your time. Appreciate all your efforts so far with the foundation and just the amazing amount of progress that that everybody all around has made, not just the foundation, but also with us, with the friends. My question that just came into my head: has there been any discussions as to increasing the fleet for like building any replica passenger cars in terms of just increasing capacity for the tourist trains in the years to come?
Yes, and that is an important factor because more capacity you've got, the more tickets you can sell, the more money you can make, which allows you to stay in business. We're actively looking at a long list of options, and that is a top priority for us. So what's your day job?
I'm an engineer with Amtrak based out of Washington, D.C., but I lived in Pennsylvania for most of my life, but the job brought me down here. So when my free time allows, I do come up for the work session. So it's always a good time to come up. And
Good for you. I'm a student locomotive engineer on the Iowa Interstate.
okay, that's exactly where I'm at right now. I'm a mere student, so just learning every day.
Yep.
I received a message from Jimmy Brown, who would like to ask a question, so I'm going to unmute him now.
Okay. Hello, Henry.
Hi.
My question is, well, before I ask it, I'll introduce myself. I'm 28. I do light assembling air quality testing bags outside of Pittsburgh. My question is, of the entire line, of the locomotives, the machine shop, the lumber shed, everything, what do you consider the most historic and most important part of the line?
You have kids?
No, I am single and I do not have kids.
Okay, well, if you had kids, what I'd ask you is, which of your kids do you love the most?
Good point.
So the thing about the EBT is it's everything. Railroad, rolling stock, workshops. You can't have one without the other. So I would argue that they're all equally important, which is kind of a flip answer, but they're all equally important unless upon reflection, you can ask me this question next year. I've changed my mind. And I believe if you asked any of the board members, they would give you the same, other board members, they give you the same reaction.
So it's a little bit challenging seeing who's putting their thumbs up because we have 5 pages of attendees. If anybody wants to shoot me a note that you want to ask a question also, then I can unmute you from there. To fill in a little time in case anybody wants to ask another question, I'll ask one. Henry, if cost were no object, if you had unlimited amounts of funds, what would you do with the East Broad Top?
If I had, so this is me personally, as opposed to asking for a board position on the subject, but what I would do with that simplifying assumption of unlimited money is put everything back exactly the way it was, but also make sure that the money included a subsidy for Amtrak so that people could get to the EBT from the new Mount Union station on the 2 or 3 times a day Amtrak service across Pennsylvania. Because in order to appreciate the EBT, you got to get there. And yeah, you can drive, which is, of course, right now what you have to do. But I think that integrating the EBT with the outside world would be spectacular. So if I had unlimited money, part of that would slop over and include ways to get to the EBT from the outside world. by train.
Okay, we have several more requests just flooded in to ask questions. I'm going to start with Bruce Bowie. I'm unmuting you now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, great. Again, like everybody, thank you, Henry, for what you and the board are doing. I'm 69. I'm a retired plant engineer from an automotive factory. Still actively going to work every day, helping teach young high school students a lot about electricity. But I've been enjoying the East Broadtop for probably 40 years now, and model it in HON3. Well, my question then is, what do you see, what does the board see, not just you, Henry, what does the board see as your primary sources of funding, say, in the next 5 to 10 years to make things happen on the railroad? Thank you.
Well, the board has stepped up with a significant financial contribution up front to prime the pump. That money went to both the initial payment to buy the railroad and also to the initial cost of building stabilization, track work, funding of the startup costs, including payroll, et cetera. There is a board committee, a board development committee, because remember, we're a normal nonprofit that is charged with the responsibility of fundraising. So we will be going to the typical sources of funding like any museum anywhere in this country would go to, ranging from individual donors to philanthropic foundations to public funds. There have been pots of money over the years that were allocated to the EBT that have never been drawn on. Not clear whether any of that is still available, but we're working on it in a number of directions. Just like the board of a museum or a symphony or a school would be going at it. So the board has committees. One of the most important board tasks is fundraising. So there's a lot of board activity going on in the area of fundraising, and we're also reaching out to friends and asking them to help us with fundraising.
Okay, we just have time for one more question to be asked. So I'm taking them in the order in which they came in. I'm sorry if we won't be able to answer all the questions. So I'm going to be unmuting John Morgan, our resident Canadian, to ask his question. And it's not.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Henry, for all that you're doing. As Chris said, I'm John Morgan. I'm retired currently. I'm a former marketer, wrecking yard owner, IT nerd, and transit driver. So I've done quite a few things in my life. My question, Henry, and I joined this a little bit late, so maybe you've already answered this, but when you say that you want to put things back all the way to 1956, does that include restoring some of the structures and so on that are not present anymore? For instance, the Saltillo Station or the mine structures up at, excuse me, at Robertsdale?
I would rather evade that question by saying that, my understanding is that most surviving structures have been taken care of largely through the help of the Friends. And are you talking about recreating structures that have disappeared or rehabilitating existing structures?
We're trying to get him unmuted here.
Okay.
John.
Talking about both rehabilitating existing structures and restoring non-existent structures at this point.
Well, a directional response would be yes, more or less. I'd rather be cagey about that because these things are all on a case-by-case basis, and don't take me too literally when I say we want to go back to 1956, because there was a lot of stuff about 1956 that was not ideal. But the overall intent is to, respecting the history of the EBT, put things back to the extent that they were, to the extent reasonable. But keep in mind that, for example, going to Joler, that didn't exist in 56. So there are things that we are looking at that may be different, but hopefully in an interesting different, as opposed to, bad different. But let me be a little bit, I apologize for being cagey about that, but I think that it's probably not practical to put everything back exactly as it was. So there are going to be lots of compromises made, but hopefully not too many.
Okay, I think we're out of time for the freestyle questions, so I'm going to turn it back over to Randy.
Okay, and before we end, because I've got to go, let me use this as one more opportunity to thank the Friends for everything that you have done to get us to this point, because if it wasn't for the Friends, there would be some big missing pieces of the puzzle that all came together in February, and it might have been such a big gap that it wouldn't have happened. So on behalf of the board, thank you for everything that you've done, and I hope that you appreciate the respect that we show the Friends by having Andy as an observer of our board meetings. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, everyone can clap by clicking on your reactions button and the little clap symbol. So let's see how many of those we can get pop up.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you for all that the foundation is doing. We very much appreciate what you're doing and appreciate your appreciation of the Friends. Without each other, none of this could happen. That was a great speech, and thank you for being part of our event here today. It helped make it truly special. We're going to go ahead and go to a 10-minute break now before we come back at just a few minutes after 2 o'clock for our annual business meeting. Could I get a spotlight, please? And we will resume, as I said, just a few minutes after 2 with our annual business meeting. So you'll see a slide up, generic slide here for about the next 10 minutes. And please rejoin us all. I think we've had a fantastic, great first segment. Thanks everybody on the call here for making this a success.
Okay, Randy, do we want to say 2:05 we restart?
Sounds good. 2:05. Okay, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started again. Again, thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon. I think this has been great so far. I hope you're all enjoying yourself. But without too much more fuss, I'm going to get on to our next lecture, as we are about a half hour behind schedule already. Just means that we have a lot of great things to share, and that's a good thing. But without further ado, I would like to introduce you to a great new addition to the Foundation's group, a man full of energy and knowledge, the railroad's new Chief Mechanical Officer, Dave Domitrovich. Can we get a spotlight on Dave?
Randy, this is Scarlett. I'm not able to locate him in the gallery view. If
Dave, could you give us a thumbs up or text one of our hosts, please? There he is. Hi, Dave. Oh, need to unmute you, I think. And
Oh.
should be receiving an unmute.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, there you are. Take it
Okay.
away, Dave.
There we
Thank you.
go. How you guys doing today? Just want to introduce myself. Dave Domitrovich. I'm the new Chief Mechanical Officer for the East Broad Top Railroad. My presentation is going to be maybe a little bit shorter than some of the other ones, mostly because I realize that there's probably going to be a lot of Q&A at the end of it. But I want to split it into two parts, basically introducing myself and giving you guys a little bit of a background of who I am and where I came from, and then talking about what we're actually doing to restore steam to the East Broad Top Railroad. So I was born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Always had a keen interest in mechanical things and history. I grew up right up the road from the Rutherford yards to a point where I could actually hear them switching cars at night in the summertime. Both sides of my family have very much Pennsylvania industrial background. My mother's side of the family were all anthracite coal miners. My father's side of the family worked for Jones and Laughlin Steel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And both my grandparents instilled a considerable amount of time taking me to see historic things as a child. And I think that added a lot to my mentality of how I grew up and looked at things. I have a lot of interests, many, probably too many, to be able to name everything, but big collector antiques and books and vintage tools, S-gauge railroader, predominantly American Flyer trains, big into World War I reenactment and World War II reenactment as well. And I went to Dauphin County Technical School growing up, took precision metals, which is basically a combination of welding and machining, and was also a standout football player and wrestler in high school. And then I attended Stevens Trade in Lancaster, which is one of the premier trade schools in the country, for welding. Keep going along with my education on that. And after that, I went to Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania and studied history. And I always wanted to be a teacher, but that didn't necessarily end up being the path I took. After college, I worked for a professional drag racing team for years, went all over the country racing, which was very interesting, very cool, but eventually you get worn out of living out of a suitcase necessarily. And I came back to the Harrisburg area, ended up working supposedly temporarily for my father at a large Chevrolet dealership in the body shop, doing production work and learning how to paint and weld, continuing to weld. And it's when I was there that Dave Boyer, who was a engineer, fireman for the East Broad Top Railroad, and then later the Strasburg Railroad, encouraged me to pursue my interests more to what I actually do. And I applied to become a welder at the Strasburg Railroad. And it was there that I started my apprenticeship to become a Boilermaker. And luckily, you know, the Strasburg has some of the best teachers in the entire world, more or less, best steam men there is, Lynn Modinger especially, Rick Musser and others that took me under their wing, taught me the trade, and we went on from there. Definitely something else I learned there was networking in the steam preservation industry, whether it was working with people like Bob Yule or Scott Lindsay with the 611 projects or numerous other people in the industry. It definitely taught me a lot about how to work with people and use your best assets to get a job completed. And there I got into operations after about 5 years, became an engineer on the Strasburg Railroad. I worked my way up to become eventually the boiler shop supervisor and the quality control manager as well. And it's funny looking back on it now, a lot of the projects I did were all narrow gauge engines, whether it was the White Pass 73 or the Huckleberry Railroad 152 that we revamped the boiler for, or numerous engines for an unnamed theme park in Orlando, Florida. We completed a lot of these jobs, and I mean, I guess maybe being like a somewhat guru of narrow gauge, it was setting me up for or something better later on in life that I just didn't know about at the time. Being the quality control manager, I also handled all the ASME and National Board Code certifications. And it definitely taught me the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things in our industry, which is definitely an issue we see day to day in steam preservation of how things should be done, maintaining a certain amount of historic fabric and the originality of things, and meeting modern code, whether it's FRA or ASME requirements to run a safe operation. After 11 years at the Strasburg Railroad, I was ready to move on to something else, and I applied to be an engineer with Amtrak, hiring out of Philadelphia. And I pretty much thought that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, a bunch of us were furloughed, and that's pretty much where I was at until I received a phone call one day from Brad Esposito, who was looking for someone to possibly work at the East Broadtop Railroad. And I came out there, took a tour of the place. Wasn't really sure about this at first, I'll be honest with you. And after talking to Lynn and seeing that the players that were involved with the rebirth of the East Broadtop, I pretty much jumped at the opportunity to become the chief mechanical officer and try and bring steam back to the East Broadtop Railroad. Being at numerous railroads around the country, I got to run down Texas and been all over with Pete Lero with Lero Productions and doing photo charters and everything else. You see a lot of different places, and there's really nowhere on earth that I've ever been like the East Broadtop. As far as the intact railroad with the shop facilities, the engines, the buildings, the track, it's just truly amazing. A lot of the other railroads that I've been to, including Strasburg, which is they are the world-class tourist railroad, everything was brought there, whether it was from another railroad, the buildings or the equipment or the cars or whatever. They were brought there, they were restored to run. That's where the East Broadtop differs. It's amazing that everything is there and everything is indigenous to the railroad itself. Every day that we are working on the equipment and trying to find tooling or equipment or parts or whatever, it's like a treasure hunt. You never know exactly what you're going to find. The buildings and storehouses there, it just blows my mind every day. And as Lynn would say, I definitely drank the Kool-Aid, and I am now on board to be a big part of bringing steam back to the railroad. It's no small undertaking, as I'm sure most of you guys know, of what we have to work with. It's basically a startup operation, more or less, to try and not necessarily take years of neglect, but just bring something back from what it was and get it operating again safely and efficiently. Now that you guys know a little bit about my background, we'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. And I think most everybody here in this group obviously knows the history of the railroad, but in late 1911, the order went into Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the first Mikado type locomotive that would come to the East Broad Top, and that was East Broad Top number 12. And with the success of number 12, the EBT ordered number 14 in late 1914. 15 would then follow. In 1916, the East Broad Top ordered the first of its three larger Mikados, number 16. And 16 was a superheated engine. It had cylinder style valves versus slide valves, and considerably more attractive effort than the 14 and 15 with the increased traffic on the East Broad Top Railroad. The larger engines were needed. Number 17 followed in 1918, and number 18 in 1920, bringing the stable up to 6 Mikado locomotives. And obviously the railroad filed for abandonment, actually on 11/18/1955, which is 11/18 is my birthday, so I kind of found that interesting. And that's about 81 years after the beginning of regular common carrier service. The common carrier ended in 1956. With the Kowalczyk family purchasing the railroad in 56 and the tourist era beginning, that was kind of the second rebirth of the East Broad Top Railroad. And then this year with the foundation purchasing the railroad, it's probably about the third rebirth now, making a top priority to rehabilitate the facilities and the locomotives to bring steam back to the East Broad Top Railroad. With experts in the field, thorough evaluations were made of all the East Broad Top Mikados. And out of the group of 6, number 14 and number 16 were chosen to be the leading candidates for rehabilitation for operational purposes. The asbestos abatements were completed, and the teardown of each locomotive was done. And both the 14 and the 16 were basically torn down to the boiler proper. So everything removed from that, and the boiler just sitting on the running gear and frame itself. Tubes and flues were removed. The cabs were removed to facilitate ease of working on the firebox itself. And the second big process would have been doing a UT survey. So we grid off the locomotive and measure each part of the gridding to see how thick the steel is. And all these numbers will be processed and calculated to see what part of the boilers need to be replaced and what don't, and basically give us a footing of where we're at as far as boiler wise. The calculations will also be used for FRA mandated Form 4, which we'll need for future operational purposes at the East Broad Top Railroad. I'm going to break down both locomotives individually at this point because they are very different on what we've found and what is needed to restore those to operation. Now, EBT 14 was obviously run considerably after the common carrier era, and some of the wear and tear on that engine became apparent due to how much it was run. There's several areas on the boiler that will need patched, including the throat sheet. The throat sheet on the 14 and 15 style Mikados, it has a large furnace bearer in the center. On the 14 especially, with the buildup of grease and road dirt and everything else, it definitely caused a major problem with corrosion on the throat there. So we're going to have to cut that whole area out, weld a patch in there, re-rivet the mud ring there, and that'll restore that area of the firebox to be able to operate. Also towards the back, there's considerable wastage on the fireman side and engineer side. Basically where the firebox outer sheets meet the floor, and both those areas will need to be cut out, a pretty considerable chunk of metal, and replaced to meet any modern code to have it operate. On the back head itself, which is the actual back of the boiler where the door hole is, we're going to install flexible stay bolts on the outside of the outer row of stay bolts. This treatment was done to EBT 15 years ago, and that eased the stress on the back head. We will be doing that same process to the 14 and the 16 as well. The running gear on the 14, so we're talking about wheels, drivers, rods, brake rigging, what have you. It's in fairly decent condition other than substantial cracking in the drivers themselves. It's definitely been determined that the drivers are going to need replaced on the 14 before we can run it in tourist service again. And we have moved the 14 up to the machine shop, locomotive shop, to use the East Broadtop's original drop pit to facilitate dropping of those drivers. Once the drivers are dropped out, they'll be sent out to an outside subcontractor, possibly Strasbourg or whoever else, to replace the wheel centers, probably with steel wheels at this point. The steel has an advantage over the cast iron, whereas if something does crack or need repaired, we can easily weld it. Whereas class 40 cast iron, we would have to braze that, as in the originals. We'll also reprofile the tires, polish or replace the crank pins, and we're going to send the side rod assemblies out as well. And that way they can renew the bearings and tram all that out, so that basically when we get everything back, we can just put that back underneath the locomotive and we'll be ready to roll. As far as the brake rigging and everything else, it looks to be in very good condition, actually. With the 14 having the drivers dropped out, we'll be constructing shop trucks. Basically it's a term for a mobile style railroad truck that would go underneath the locomotive itself and allow for it to be moved without the drivers underneath of it. Once they're constructed, we'll be dropping out the lead truck as well. The lead truck of the 14, it needs considerable work. It's definitely leaning to the left, and there's some parts broken, which is forcing it to the left side. The tires will probably need replaced and or reprofiled, and a considerable amount of work done to that. If we go on to the 14's tender, it's really not in that bad a shape. I would say fair condition. The top of it definitely needs replaced, and several patches on the inside of the coal space, along with the interior baffles, will all need to be redone. But all in all, considering its age, it's in pretty good condition. Right now, the tank, we're going to remove it and probably put it on a flat car, and that way it'll allow for a complete evaluation of the tank itself, along with the tender frame and the trucks for the tender. So that's pretty much where we're at with 14. As far as East Broadtop 16, you know, 16 is an interesting locomotive, considering that it hasn't run since the end of common carrier service in 1956. That fact is definitely a wild card in its restoration. We're trying to figure out where we're at with that, since it's been sitting for more or less 64 years. And just like the 14, the 16 has been torn down completely, the asbestos abated on it, everything removed, all the appliances removed, the tubes removed, flues removed, superheater units removed, and basically we're left with a shell. And the UT survey is basically being completed on the 16. And what's very promising on that is the 16's boiler is more or less in a like new condition. It'll need a little bit of repair work here or there, but the boiler barrel itself is only a couple thousandths of an inch from being new. The firebox and the outer sheets are in very good condition as well, which that is very, very promising. We're going to do the same treatment on the back head of installing flexible stay bolts around that outer seam to add with some flexibility to the back head and the firebox itself. The one deal that we have to approach, and we're discussing different options, is that probably about 85% of the superheater units for the 16 are going to need to be replaced. They're in pretty poor condition at best. Thin, leaks, overheating spots, you name it. Whether we can scrounge up some superheater units on the property, which are new to the EBT that were made in the common carrier era, and or remove units from possibly the 18 or the 17 in order to get the 16 going. That has yet to be determined, and we're talking about these things. We could probably also have brand new superheater units built, but that's a substantial price tag to the railroad itself. The running gear of the 16 appears to be in very good condition. We don't see the cracking in the drivers or the serious wear on the tires that the 14 has. And basically what my plan is right now and what we're working on, we have the 16 moved out of stall 8, which is our more modern repair facility in the roundhouse, and moved it back over into the older part of the roundhouse over one of the deep pits. We're dropping all the cellars out of it, which are the bottoms of the driving boxes where the actual lubrication pads are located. And we're going to repack all that, clean everything out very well, re-lube everything, and then basically take it out for a test run using one of the Plymouths and an infrared thermometer style heat gun, and see what it does. Measure lateral, see how the rods react, see how the axles react, and go from there. And that'll give us at least some sort of starting point to what we have to do to the running gear. And hopefully we don't have to do much. I mean, that would aid greatly in getting steam back quicker into operation. The sellers have been fighting us pretty much all week. I've had my team working on them, but when you have something jammed in there for the last 64 years, it doesn't come out necessarily as easy as you think it would. So we're working on that. Hopefully in the next week or two, we will give it a test run and see where we go. Moving on to the 16's tender. The tender is in poor condition and needs a considerable amount of work to the tank itself. Mainly because of the coal being stored in it for the last 64 years in the roundhouse. That coal is very acidic, and mixing with moisture has deteriorated the tank of the tender considerably to a point where it's extremely thin. And we're looking into options right now, possibly replacing the tender tank. Being a welded tank, it might be a little bit easier than a riveted tank as on the smaller Mikados, or patching the tank. But we're looking into a couple different options on that right now. As far as appliances go on both the engines, so we're talking about safety valves, brake valves, the air pumps, everything like that. The safety valves have already been sent out to an outside contractor to be rebuilt. The air pumps, injectors, lubricators, everything. We have the technology, the tooling, and the people in place to do all that work in-house at the East Broad Top, which is really nice and will save a considerable amount of money in the long run that we can put towards other things that we need, like maybe a tender to bring steam back. Both engines will also receive brand new insulation and stainless steel jacketing, along with a brand new paint job, obviously, before they would enter service. Obviously, the big question that everybody's asking right now is when, and when will steam return to the East Broad Top? And definitely from working on this stuff for years now, I will make no commitment and no promises, but we are definitely hoping for sometime next year. Steam engines are definitely just cantankerous beasts, and you have no clue what you're going to get into. But everything we're seeing with 16 right now is pretty promising, and it would be pretty cool to have that engine running first, considering that it's never run since the common carrier era of the East Broad Top. The one thing I want to stress with taking the job as the chief mechanical officer and talking to Brad and talking to the board and everybody else is that we will not cut corners just to put steam back quicker. That's not what we're trying to do here. Quality and safety will not be compromised in order just to get an engine out quicker. We're going to put a very safe and very reliable product out there that can run reliably as much as we need it to within reason of what steam engines can do, and that everybody can enjoy. You combine that with the track work and the structure rehabilitation and everything else that's in process right now. And the East Broad Top, which is the narrow gauge of the East, can rival any tourist operation in the United States. We just need a little bit of time, effort, and money to continue to have this done. Basically, that's where we're at, and I'm pretty sure there's probably going to be a lot of questions right now. So, Brandy or whoever else, we turn this back over, and we can answer as many questions as we can.
Thanks, Dave. That was really informative, eye-opening, and I'm sure everybody appreciates what you have to say and agreed. I think there's probably a pile of questions accumulating right now, and we'll turn that over to Chris to begin asking those to you. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Okay, first off, just to put some limits on how far the questions stray. Dave, you're the chief mechanical officer. That puts you over top of all locomotives, including the diesels as well, correct?
Yes, all motive power equipment at the railroad.
Okay, does that include rolling stock or not?
I'm working with Lynn on some of the rolling stock, but Brad is still handling a lot of that. I have my hands full with the steam locomotives.
Because we're getting some questions that are not motive power, so we'll skip over those.
Yeah.
Let's start with a question about the trailing trucks on 14 and 15. There was a lot of to-do made about the time that the railroad shut down, that they were the one on 15 was worn out, and they pulled out 14s, and it was worn out too. So could you go into some detail on the status of the trailing trucks?
Yeah, both the 14 and 15's trailing trucks need a considerable amount of work. At one point, we had those at the Strasburg Railroad for a full evaluation. We're still pretty much going off what was evaluated years ago for that. There's several people in-house that are willing to step up and do some of the work to the trailing trucks that are necessary to have that to go back under 14. But a lot of those talks are still in the preliminary stages right now. The 16's trailing truck looks to be in fairly good condition, along with the lead truck itself.
Okay. The next question, I'm going to abbreviate this one a little bit. It's basically asking 14 or 15 was run more recently than 14 and 17 more recently than 16. So the question is, why were those not chosen versus the ones that were chosen?
And that's a very good question. It's been asked to me many, many times already. As far as the 15 goes, the boiler itself is in good shape, but the running gear is in fairly deplorable condition. Much worse than the 14, even though it was running last. As far as the 17 goes, that's kind of the opposite. The boiler needs considerably more work, including if you look at the rear flue sheet up into the knuckle area, which is the top of the rear flue sheet, there's substantial deterioration and cracking in that. And all these factors were weighed when what engines were determined to be the prime candidates to return to steam as quickly and financially feasible, and that all that weighed into it. And that's why the 16 and the 14 were chosen over those.
Okay, our next question is about the 18. Another thing that's often talked about is how the final run was made by 17 because a problem was reported with 18 and was pushed into the roundhouse. Do you have any thoughts on whether there's actually a problem with 18 that caused it to not be used in the last run?
We're still going through all the inspection records, and we're putting them into spreadsheets, literally, setting inspection records on the floor and reading them all and seeing where we're at with everything as far as running gear wise or firebox problems or whatever else. And it was with the 18 that there was some lateral problems with the running gear, and that's yet to be determined on that. Again, it goes back to that the 16 was just in better shape, period, to bring back quicker and more financially feasible operation.
Okay, next question. Have you evaluated the tenders on 17 and 18 to see if they are viable to use on 16?
We have not, but that's definitely something that's coming down the road here. We're trying to get prices on the tank itself for the 16 and see where we're at. The 18, I would say, is probably in the same exact condition as the 16, considering that it's had coal in it for the last 64 years. It's probably no better. Now, the 17 might be a viable option to bring over onto the 16, and that can be a possibility going down the road.
Okay. This next one's a loaded question, so feel free to refuse to answer.
We'll roll with it.
Will the 14 and 16 be restored to tourist colors with all the white striping, or freight 1956, which is not the most important thing for fixing a locomotive, but everybody wants to know.
Yeah, well, obviously the most important things in tourist railroading are what whistle is it going to wear and what paint color will it have. That is up to the board of directors, and that's above me. My personal preference would be more to the common carrier era of railroading, to follow that historic look that the East Broad Top had in the 1950s, and much less the tourist era look of the brass bands and white stripes and what have you.
All right. But I think you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. I'll push that issue as much as I can, but I can only go so far with certain things.
Okay, here's a good question. Do you have crews working on both locomotives, two separate crews, or do you have one crew that bounces back and forth?
Well, yeah, that's a great question as well, and it's very fluid and it changes day to day. I'm lucky enough to to have Dan and Roy, who are two guys that have been with the railroad for over 30 years and know the engines very well. And I can put them on a crew together. And then I have a younger crew of Nicholas Brightbill and Chris Brang and some of these other guys that are all very, very talented, but don't necessarily have the in-depth knowledge that the guys that have been there forever have. So I kind of split the crews up like that. Right now, Dan and Roy are working on the 14 up in the locomotive shop, and the rest of my guys are working in the roundhouse. But I mean, things change hour to hour, day to day. It depends if we have to unload ties or rail or what have you. You know, people are pulled from here to there. We don't have a 20, 30, or 40 guy operation right now. We have like a 10-person operation. So everybody has to kind of be a jack of all trades at this point.
Okay. Next question. How do you feel working at a location that is far different compared to other steam heritage sites like a Strasburg or New Hope in Ivyland?
That, I mean, I think I touched on that a little bit. That's very, sorry. That's very much the allure of the East Broad Top. Being a history guy, there's nothing else like it. I mean, where can you go into a building and you're looking for rivets to use on a hopper car, and you find rivets that, you know, were made by the East Broad Top in the common carrier, and you can use those for hot riveting on a hopper car, or stay bolts and everything else. You know, people talk about historic fabric, and I can't think of anything more historic than we're going to repair engines that ran at a railroad for well over 50 years using parts that the railroad made that have been sitting in stock as new old stock for all these years. There's no place else like that. It can't be duplicated. And that's what really separates the East Broad Top from such a place as the Strasburg Railroad. It's comparing apples to oranges, really.
Okay, next question. I think we all know that number 12 is in pretty rough shape. Do you want to say a few words on what the status of number 12 is, just as far as its condition?
Yeah, 12 would probably be one of the last candidates to bring back into service. There's a, I'm sorry again, considerable bolt cracking in the firebox, considerable wastage of the firebox sheets themselves, and it needs a tremendous amount of running gear work. It's just much more than the other engines, and it's going to take a lot more time and effort to bring that engine back into safe operating service.
Okay. Next question. I don't completely understand the point of this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Once each engine's restoration is complete, will they be close to specs as they were when they were delivered from Baldwin?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think how to answer that question. I mean, more or less, we're using Baldwin standard practice along with the original blueprints, which we have all of them, to restore these engines back to their more or less their original operating condition. Like I said, some things would be changed slightly, as in with the 14, we're probably going to put steel wheels in it instead of the original cast iron. We're adding flexible stay bolts in certain areas. But yeah, more or less, it would be an as-built condition. Once all the calculations are done, you know, a couple things might have to change here or there to meet modern code, you know, such as like the steam dome lids might have to be thicker and different things like that. But yeah, more or less, pretty much the same as what they came from Philadelphia.
Okay, that segues nicely into the next question, which is basically asking if the new steel centers on 14 are going to be visually identical to the original cast iron ones.
Yeah, absolutely. You would not be able to tell any difference, period.
Okay.
We're going to try and keep everything to that historic look.
Okay, we're back to trailing trucks again. Yay. We basically
ask boiler questions. I'm a boiler guy, not a running gear guy.
Well, the question basically wants to know if we're going to get the the trailing trucks back to the locomotive that they originally came from.
Yeah, and that's a possibility. Right now, our biggest goal is to get engines running. So if we might have to necessarily take a part from another engine in order to get 14 running or get 16 running, that's where we're at right now. We have to work within the financial means and the technology we have at this point at the East Broad Top itself.
Okay. That's the end of the questions have been submitted, so I'm going to throw in a few of my own because I'm asking the questions. Do you see any of the machinery other than the brake stand, which we know has already been in operation, any of the machinery at the East Broad Top to produce parts or sheet metal for the locomotives?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The slip roll, definitely. I would like to roll all my own jacketing there. I don't see any point in subletting that. And especially the wheel lathe as well. The wheel lathe is being revamped right now to bring it up to a little bit more modern, more of like World War II type technology using tracers and what have you, that we should be very easily able to turn drivers ourselves within the next couple of years. The matter is getting some way to power all this stuff, whether it's with a stationary steam engine or what have you. A mobile air compressor is not going to cut it for a lot of that. With Brad working on the line shafts in the machine shop, we already restored the punch and the shear that we made panels for the hopper car on. So I see no reason why a lot of parts cannot be made at the railroad itself without altering or damaging any of the equipment that's in that shop. You know, looking down the road, it would be very nice to have a more modern lathe and a Bridgeport milling machine and what have you. But you know, that's as money and time permits.
Okay. Next question. Did the EBT use grease or oil in their driver cellars?
In the cellars themselves, it's oil. On all the rods and everything, it's grease. For right now, we're still going to use oil in the cellars. With the loop pads that we have some in stock that are new old stock. The side bearings on the side rods, I would eventually like to convert to oil. That's something that Strasburg Railroad did with a lot of success. One of the rods on the 15 was converted years ago by them to oil. It's much cleaner and much more easy to deal with than the old style hard grease on those rods.
Okay. Next question. Does the EBT have the casting patterns for the driver centers, or do they have to be created?
As far as the 14's driver centers, they have to be created, but we do have the blueprints to everything, so that makes that a lot easier. We do have a tremendous amount of the original patterns. We just dug out over the last week or two all the side bearers for the grates for the 14 and the 16, the grate patterns themselves. All that stuff will be sent out to a foundry to make new parts using the original patterns. So it's kind of a 50-50 mix of everything we have right now.
Okay, and this will be the last question. It's been said by some EBT historians that the boilers that are currently on the locomotives are not the original ones they were delivered with from Baldwin. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've heard some theories and stories about that. I cannot confirm or deny any of that, but I mean, more or less from what we're seeing right now, a lot of the stuff looks original to the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Anything that's historic fabric on these engines, you have to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, they were repaired and restored and changed numerous times over the years throughout the common carrier era and into the tourist era themselves. So, I mean, that's kind of a very gray area and a question that's hard to answer. I mean, maybe Lee or somebody else who's much more well-versed in the history of the Broad Top than I am could answer that more in depth.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have time for. I believe Andy has a quick announcement to make before we move forward. And I turn it over to Andy.
Well, definitely not to steal Randy's thunder, but wanted to thank Dave, and I know Randy will thank Dave as well. Fantastic discussion, very open and honest, which we very much appreciate. But the main reason I wanted to jump in for a quick second was just that while Dave was talking, we actually received $1,000 donation, which helps kick off that 2021 fundraising campaign that Lee talked about. So thank you very much, and off to a great start with that. But I'll hand it over to Randy to wrap up Dave's discussion there.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic news, Andy. I hope we, not to use a horrible pun, but keep up with that head of steam. It's fantastic. This is such an exciting year. It's exciting to hear all this. I mean, our members haven't had this level of things to talk about. This open communication is fantastic. And I know we at the FEBT and our board are so excited to begin this real effort of keeping in good touch with our membership and keeping them apprised of what's going on. It's going to be exciting times going forward, and we really look forward to keeping the momentum going. With that said, we're going to take our last break here. We're running a little bit long, but I think everybody's excited to stay tuned in because there's such great topics being discussed. And we have one more great topic on some history in Robertsdale coming up after the break with a well-known name in our group, Ron Pearson. And with that, I will kick us into break mode, being at 4:18. It looks like another 4:30 restart time. So if everybody wants to go take their break and tune back in at 4:30, and we'll kick off with Ron's lecture. Thanks very much. All right, I hope everybody had a good break. And we're now back for our final segment of the 2020 virtual EBT event. I'd really like to thank everybody who's taken part in creating this, our board, all of our members who've helped prepare slides for their various areas of involvement. I think the event has gone off great. It's looked very professional, and we couldn't do it without everyone's help. All of you out there watching included. We can't do these things without your support and your involvement, and it feels great to be part of something so good. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and now hand the mic over to our last presenter today, that comes from a gentleman that we all know and has delighted many of us before with many of his excellent and well-researched presentations, Mr. Ron Pearson, with a new presentation titled Searching for the Lost Robertsdale Coal Mines and Coal Cleaning Plant. And if we can get a spot, oh, there's Ron right there. Good to see you, Ron, and we'll let you take over.
Okay, my name is Ron Pearson, and I'm an East Broad Top railroad modeler. I started modeling in 1985, and I wanted to model the East Broad Top in 1947, where the coal was its main cargo. I wanted to see the hopper cars being loaded with coal in Robertsdale, going down the East Broad Top main line down to Mount Union, to where the coal plant would then wash the coal, and the empty hoppers would then go back. But in order to do that, I was going to have to model the coal mines. So I had brushed up on everything I could find, And there was a good book by Lee Rainey, which got me started on what the number of coal mines were and where they were at. And there was a couple of pamphlets and a few photos, but most of the photos were not dated. I didn't know exactly which mine they were located for, and only a part of the colliery would have been covered. So I had to start doing my own research. And so I started collecting photos. I visited museums. I bought the 1938 aerial photographs. And with my friend Rick Case, we went to visit all of the coal mines that were in operation in 1947 to sort of fit the pictures and the maps with the real live location of those. And with that, I was able to start gathering enough information to start building the mines with a fidelity that it would at least look like the mine could have operated. Obviously, it's a smaller one, but it could have operated. And next slide. And the next few slides will show some of the mines that I have already completed. That's Rockhill number 1. Next slide. That's the newest of the Rockhill number 5 mines, which was built starting in 1912 and operated all the way up to 1952. Next slide. This is Rockhill number 6, which was, it last operated in 1925, although it was kept open to supply steam for the boilers that were down at the bottom of the shaft. Next slide. This is Rockhill number 7 and 8. Next slide. This is the first Rockhill number 9. This is my latest one that I just finished about a year ago. Next slide. This is the newest Rockhill number 9. Next slide. This is the Jacobs mine. Next slide. This is the Joller mine, actually the first one that I built. Next slide. This is one of the truck dump mines, Rockhill number 12. Next. Now, after finishing all of those, I'm a modeler at heart. What was I going to build now? So as you can see, is what I started to do since I was modeling in 1947. I started to work my way backwards until I got to right around the end of World War I. When I tried to go back past World War I and explore what the mines might have been, I couldn't find much information. And in an article written by Vagel Keller in the Timber Transfer about 10 years ago, he had remarked that it was going to be very, very difficult to find information prior to the end of World War I, because Robert Siebert's, who was president of the East Broad Top at the time, was upgrading the coal mines, because initially the railroad was built to support the pig iron industry with the Rockhill furnaces, and those closed in 1908, so they had to come up with a new business plan, and the new business plan was going to be coal was going to be their main money making endeavor. And so they upgraded not only the East Broad Top main line and their the East Broad Top facilities, but they also upgraded their coal mines. Well, when they did that, they either destroyed or buried or time destroyed the facilities before World War II or World War I. So I was in a difficult spot in terms of how to go past earlier than about Rockhill number 6. So actually Rockhill 7 and 8. So I had to start doing much more research. Next slide. This map shows the mines that were in operation around the the late 1800s. You can see Rockhill number 3 off onto the left, Rockhill number 1, and then across the track would have been Rockhill number 2 and Rockhill number 4. And then I put in Rockhill number 5 where it would be. Now, when the railroad was in its beginning years, it needed clean coal for the pig iron industry. And so therefore, the coal cleaning plant was built in Robertsdale, and it probably connected to Rockhill number 3 because there was no other mine that it could connect to. But in 1900, in 1890, they closed Rockhill number 3, and that's when number 5 came in. And I think number 5 then was routed through the track of Rockhill number 3 so that the coal could get to the coal cleaning plant. Next slide. Now this is sort of the time frame of things, and you can see that around 1890 is when Rockhill number 5 came in and replaced probably Rockhill number 3, and then it would furnish the coal for the coal cleaning plant. And that coal cleaning plant kept operating until probably 1912, when Rockhill number 5 was totally rebuilt. Next slide. What I've done is I actually compressed 3 maps. One of them of the older East Broad Top to the 1938 aerial photos indicated. So you can see up at the top would have been Rockhill number 3, and then Rockhill number 5 came into it, and then went to the coal cleaning plant. Next slide. When we were searching to try to find remnants of either number 3 or the original number 5, basically the only thing we could find was this big brick wall. And the brick wall is right along the main line, and it has a step at the upper portion which would allow the construction of a tipple over the top of it. And we think this is that wall, and then the scale house would have been built on the tipple, and then the cleaning plant would have been further back. And that's the only artifact that we were able to find that for sure belonged to the original coal cleaning plant in Robertsdale. This picture is probably Rockhill number 3 before number 5 was in existence. And it shows the upper track is the coal coming into it, and the lower track is the return. And off to the right would have been the coal cleaning plant. Now behind the loaded cars, you can see white lines, which are actually probably steam lines that came from the original boiler house, which was located near where the current number 5, not current, but the one that's left, the number 5 mine entrance. Next slide. This is a photo similar to that, showing the coal cars sitting on top of the loads coming into the plant. Next slide. This is the excuse me. This is the first of the photos that I have found that show right in the middle is the coal cleaning plant, Off to its left is the hoist house, and to the right is the mine car repair shop. Now you'll notice that it does not have any steam stacks, smokestacks, and so probably it was still receiving steam from the original boiler house. So probably this photo was pre-1900. You can see the steam lines in front of the hoist house on the left-hand side of the track, and then you can see the track apex. And so the cars came down to that apex, and then by gravity went down to the coal cleaning plant. Next slide. In the literature, the coal cleaning plant is said to have a Bradford breaker, and the drawing is of a Bradford breaker where the axis, it revolved around the axis, and the dropping of the coal from the top to the bottom, from the top to the bottom, from the top to the bottom, broke the coal till it fit through the optimum size holes that were in the circumference of the drum. Next slide. Then that went into a sluice washer, which is kind of like the way they washed gold. The rock would sink to the bottom, the coal would float over riffles on the top, and when the riffles got all filled up, and the coal would float over and come down the slide on the right-hand side. When the riffles got all filled up, that whole mechanism would be lifted up, and then the pony, which would have been in the riffles, was washed away, and then the riffles and stuff would be dropped back down, and then they just started all over. So my assumption would be that they probably had a few coal breakers as well as a few of the sluice washers in that building. Next slide. I started to be able to figure out how the mine itself operated from the first couple of photos that I was able to find. One of them was sent to me in the mail by, I don't know who sent it to me, but I got it anyway. And this one shows the mine car repair shop in the center. And then off to the right, the first building you see is the hoist house. And then the second building, the furthest building on the right, would be the coal cleaning plant. And you'll notice that in this photo, unlike the previous one we saw, there are two smokestacks. The one on the left is probably because they put a boiler into the hoist house to help run the hoist for the tail rope system that the railroad utilized to move the coal. And then the one on the right is probably a boiler for the coal cleaning plant. And you can see the wooden hoppers to the right. Next slide. Now this is actually the same photo, except it was in a newspaper, and therefore it is not very clear. But you can see on the furthest left, that is the maintenance shop. You can see in the middle the hoist house, and you can see on the right the coal cleaning plant. But at the right end of the coal cleaning plant, you can see a trestle which goes across the East Broadtop main line to what is there today is a bunch of bony piles. There are actually several of them, and they run for probably a good half mile, and there's several of them that run between the rail and the Trough Creek. So that was probably the refuse from that coal cleaning plant. This photo shows there's a track that comes from that trestle that runs to the maintenance shop. And it goes, and when the photographer took the photo, he caught the scale house. Remember, the apex delivered the coal cars by gravity, and it went to the scale house, and then it went over to the trestle, and then it was, and you can see the unloading facilities underneath the trestle there. And the track that's in the nearest was a kickback track, which went back to the maintenance shop so that the mine cars could be repaired. Next slide. This is another photo of the same area, and again, on the left smokestack has the hoist house, and the right building is the coal cleaning plant. And then in front of the coal cleaning plant, you can see a little square gable building, which probably is their office building. It's either the office building or it's a storage facility. I don't know for sure which. And in front, again, you can see the overhead track is for the loads, and the lower track is for the return of the empties, again, using the tail rope system. And off to the left side, you can see stacks and rows of mine props that were stored in the area as well. Next photo. I found this photo, and this is showing the coal cleaning plant from the opposite side. You can tell by looking at the building on the left, which is the coal cleaning plant, that in front of it is the tipple, which carried the bony across the track, and you can see the unloading chutes. But the building itself looks like it's pretty well dilapidated. So my bet is this photo was taken right around the 1912 timeframe, when the boiler house, which is the one with the stacks there, was built for the new Rockhill number 5, which is the one that the remnants are there in Robertsdale today. And then in the back of that building, you can see a bridge which probably carried the coal to the boiler house there. Next slide. This is the same photo, and I know exactly when this photo was taken because it was taken from a book, and that's why it's not, the clarity isn't too great. But you can see on the left, on the far left, is the water tank. The next building to it is the scale house. And then the next building to that is the new boiler house. And you can see emanating from the boiler house is an overhead pipeline, which goes to the new hoist house. Unfortunately for that boiler house, it was built in 1912 and it was destroyed in 1914 when a safety valve in one of the boilers got stuck. The pressure built up too much and blew up the whole boiler house, took out part of the tipple, and obviously took out part of the pipeline. But the pipeline that is furthest to the right survived, and therefore the hoist house, which is at the end of that pipeline, survived as well. Next slide. The next slide shows that surviving hoist house, and you can see the same pipeline in front of it, and you can see the boiler parts spread all over everywhere, and you can see some of the parts of the smokestacks. Next slide. The next slide shows you even more of the remnants of the boiler house. You can see the parts of the stacks on the right. You can see the boilers lying on their sides in the middle. And then you can see that bridge on the left that probably carried the coal to fire the boilers. Next slide. This is a textbook photo of the same area, and you can see the number of people that came to see the activity a small while after the boiler house had exploded. Next slide. And this is the last of the photos that shows the complete devastation of the whole thing. So next slide. This is the new boiler house that replaced the previous new boiler house only 2 years later. You can see on top of the trestle that the scale house, and then right beside it is a brand new boiler house. And they obviously had some admirers that came to see the same thing. Next slide. This is a later version of that photo. And again, you can see the water tank on the far left, and you can see the loading trestle. But you don't see the coal cleaning plant anymore. So when this boiler was built, they probably either tore the coal cleaning plant down right prior to it, or when they built the previous one, which is the one that exploded. That was probably the terminus of the coal cleaning plant. So either in 1912 or between 1912 and 1914, when this photo was taken, the coal cleaning plant that was in Robertsdale was torn down. And then the new one was built in Mount Union in 1915 to handle coal from any of the mines, so that any of the mines could have had clean coal. Now again, you can see the pipelines coming off the boiler house, and there are 2 sets of them. Well, the set in the back is for Rockhill number 5. The set in the front is for Rockhill number 1, which had closed in 1890, but reopened in 1911. So they had to put the steam lines from the number 5 boiler house about 1/4 of a mile to 1/2 a mile to Rockhill number 1, because it had been refurbished to the tail rope haulage system and used steam for its winches at that time. Next slide. The previous boiler house was probably replaced by this boiler house, which is the one that remained all the way up until the end in 1954, the end of the operating coal mines, deep coal mines. And in front of it, you can see the office. This might be the same office that was in one of the earlier photos. Only the roof had changed from a gable one to this style of roof. And you can see on the right-hand side the track carrying the loaded coal cars to the new tipple, which had been built further on down. Next photo. This is a photo of the whole area, probably in the mid-1930s to early 1940s. And you can see the new boiler house with its 4 stacks. You can see the mule barn off to the right, and then off to the left, you can see the water tank. Next slide. This photo shows the way things were lined up, that the boiler house is on the right. In front of it is the office, and then further on back to the left is the hoist house, and then furthest to your right is where and down the track is where the tipple was. And this is the arrangement that they had in 1952 to 54 when this all closed down. So between 1914, when the boiler house was rebuilt, and 1952 to 54 is when these facilities were in operation. But now is what this brought on. I had already built this particular 1947 version of the number 5 colliery. But now I had photos of the previous number 5 colliery. When I first started, I didn't know that there was a first number 5 and a second number 5. So now I have a new mine that I can spend my time trying to build. Next slide. This is an even newer, this is another photo of number 5 with the water tank on the right and the tipple on the left. Next slide. This is my favorite photo of Rockhill number 5 with the water tank on the right and the steam engine coming in with its hopper cars in the middle, the tipple on the left, and then in the background is the mule barn. Next slide. Now, did all of these changes that Robert Siebert made in the coal portion of the railroad, did it do any good? Well, if you look at the data, 1912 is when new number 5 came into being, and that's exactly when the coal started going from 300,000 tons per year to 400,000 tons per year. Then it went up to 500,000 tons per year, and even higher than that. So the improvements that they made was able to increase the volume of coal that they produced, which obviously meant that the coal cleaning plant down in the new coal cleaning plant that they had built in Mount Union was receiving more coal, and therefore it's a good thing that they built it so that they could handle the increased volume, and then the increased volume would obviously mean more sales. Next photo. Now, what I am now able to do is to use those photos to make drawings of the buildings, which will allow me to make a module of that particular mine. Now, one of the faults with photos is if you don't have photos of all 4 sides, then you're going to have to make up the other 2 sides. But at least fortunately, I've got one side, and I know approximately how the buildings were situated so that I can put together a module which will reasonably, with some kind of fidelity, mimic what the railroad utilized during the early 1900s. Center photo is again the maintenance shop with a cupola on top. The first of the smokestacks is the hoist house, so I know which one side of the hoist house looked like. The building on the right is the tipple, and I can see what, again, one side of it looked like. And then I know on the front was where the actual chutes were for the unloading of the coal, and probably where the coal cleaning plant emptied its coal into waiting East Broadtop hoppers. And then in front of that is what I think is the office building. Next photo. And again, this is the same photo, but you can see the tipple, how it extends over the track so that you can get rid of the waste boning. This is again shows I'll be able to model the scale house because at least I can see one side of it, which is better than 0 sides. I hate to make things up totally. And you kind of know where the smoke, the chimney was for the scale house. You can see it on the right-hand side of the building. So you can get some details from that to put the best drawings together that you can of what the facility looked like. And then on the right, you can see the unloading chutes for the coal. Next slide. And this again, it gives me a better look at the front of the hoist house and a little bit more of what the coal cleaning plant. But you can see there's still a lot of missing stuff. So I keep looking for more photos, hopefully hoping that I can make an even better model with greater fidelity. Next slide. This last slide shows the module that I'm going to build. And you can see on the left where I have the mine portal, the tracks would lead from the mine straight to your right, would go to the apex of the loads track, take a right-hand turn on the one side of the coal cleaning plant, go down to the scale house at the bottom. The coal would be weighed. It would be pushed on to the tipple. And then in the middle, you'll see the unloading chute. The unloading chute could either drop the coal into a waiting East Broadtop hopper, or it could divert the coal into the coal cleaning plant, where the Bradford breakers would break it up and the sluice washers would wash it. It would then make a U-turn and come out the same side that it went in and load into a second track of empty EBT hoppers. You can also see the hoist house on the right, and it would control the wire, the rope that would pull the loaded coal mine hoppers up to the apex, and then gravity would run it through the rest of it. At the front of the coal cleaning plant, you can see the track that goes across the main line and then runs down along the East Broadtop main line, and then deposits the bony, and then the coal car would be pushed back, and then it would just be recycled through the whole mine system. So this is the module that I intend to be building over the next couple of years. So at least I've got myself a project now for another couple of years. These photos that I found, actually I didn't find them. I sort of relocated them. They were in the Robertsdale Coal Mine Museum, but they were unlabeled as to what they were, other than they were East Broadtop photos. And so that one photo that I got from the newspaper actually enabled me to identify these unknown photos, so that I was able to put together this module and then make the drawings for these buildings. So even though things are not easy to find, that doesn't mean you can't find information. I mean, it took me 5 years to find the information. So it's not an easy task to go back to the early 1900s and find enough information that will allow you to model things that nobody else can have the information in order to do that. So it was a fun trip to uncover this kind of information and being able to utilize it. Now, I'll publish this in the next couple of years in the timber transfer. So other people that are interested in building early 1900 East Broadtop coal mine will have one that is based on actual photos of it. I thank everyone for listening to me.
Thanks, Ron. That was, again, fantastic as usual. If you don't mind, we could maybe open it up for a few questions.
Sure.
The first question that everybody wants to know, how many people died in the boiler explosion?
One.
One, just one.
One guy was sitting on the tipple waiting for his shift to begin when it blew. And so he didn't make it. But at the time that was happening, there was a train load of workmen who were going to repair the track further down the line. There was over 50 of them. If that had blown a little bit earlier, the human destruction would have been a lot worse.
Okay. The current portal of number 5 that you can go back in the woods and see right now, that concrete portal, does that date from that 1912 rebuilding?
I wish I knew. If you go back to the newspaper articles, it says that they built a new tipple, a new winch house, and a new boiler house. Does not say anything about the portal. So I do not know whether the portal that is still extant, whether that's the portal from 1912 or whether that's a portal that was actually used all the way back to 1889, when number 5 first started.
Okay, just speaking from my own experience, it seemed like the EBT really got into use of concrete in the late 1900s and 1910s. So, and prior to that, everything was stone. So it would make sense that it was a poured concrete portal at that time.
I'm not sure it's a poured concrete portal though. I think it's a stone portal.
I'll have to go back and look at it then.
Okay.
Okay. Here's a question. The boiler in the October 1914 explosion appears to be superheated. Is that correct?
I'm not an engineer. I'm a chemist. Don't know.
Okay. So are you theorizing that the coal cleaning plant was pretty much abandoned in 1912?
It was either abandoned in 1912 when they rebuilt it, or it was abandoned in 1914 because the boiler explosion took it out. I'm not sure which. I think I did find an article in the newspaper which was written, I believe, at the end of 1912, and it said that the new facilities for Rockhill number 5 were up and operating and performing well, and that the old facility was torn down. So my bet is at the end of 1912, that at the beginning of 1912, that they tore down the coal cleaning plant. Now, what I don't know is they opened the new one in 1915 in Mount Union, and they had no clean coal. They had no clean coal facility between 1912 and 1915. But maybe they didn't need much clean coal because obviously the Rockhill furnaces had been closed for several years by that time.
Okay. Initially, when the railroad, the first few years of operation, why were there so many mines right around Robertsdale when there were only 2 seams of coal?
I think that they were chasing a more economic way to get the coal out of the ground. The coal wasn't in a flat seam. The coal was going up and down and up and down and up and down. And in the very beginning, they didn't have any tail rope system, which means mules had to carry the coal cars up and down all these hills underground. And so they were probably looking for better places for the portal to be that would allow them to get the coal out at a less cost.
Okay. I think that's the last question that we have. So I'll turn it back over to Randy.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. Always an enlightening experience hearing you talk, Ron. And thanks for the research you do and your willingness to share it with the group. It's a great thing. That brings us to pretty much the end of our virtual event here. I am going to turn the mic back over to the FEBT president, Mr. Andy Van Syke. He has a few closing comments to make, and the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, so I'll try to keep it brief. We're after 5 o'clock, so everybody's getting hungry for dinner, I know, myself included. So just 2 or 3 quick thoughts here. First, thank you tremendously to Randy, Chris, Scarlett, Ray, Russ, that all made this possible. And I apologize if I left someone out there. This has gone very well, very enlightening, very entertaining for the day. And it's the best possible outcome of what we could have done safely this year. So this has just been fantastic and much appreciated. And again, too, a special thank you to the 3 speakers that we've had today: Henry, Posner, Dave Domitrovich, and of course Ron Pearson here at the end. All 3 very fantastic and covering different aspects today, which was fantastic too. So much appreciated. We also got our fundraising campaign off with a good start there with that $1,000 donation here an hour or so ago. So that's great. And I'm sure some of the others of you have been on online looking at the both the company store as well as possibilities making donations. So much appreciated there. And I'll just touch on one last thing for all you guys that held out here. First of all, we had over 100 people at one point today, and we still have, darn close to that right now. So very impressive that we got the attendance and interest that we did. So much appreciated there too. For those of you who did hold out, if you're interested, Brad, the general manager, of course, of the railroad, did allow me to make one quick announcement, which is that tickets this week, tickets will go on sale for their holiday train. Planning to run holiday trains the first 2 weekends of December. They're going to do it in conjunction with the Rockhill Trolley Museum, of course. And if you want to get out there and ride those, like I said, those tickets will probably go on sale Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm told. So just watch their website, and some exciting things to come, of course. And like Henry talked about, we have a great relationship with the foundation. They truly embrace us as partners. And we are very eager to keep working with them as they make significant progress ahead. Appreciate everybody staying on. Happy Columbus Day, and hopefully we'll see you all in person very soon. Back to Randy.
Thanks, Andy. I will echo Andy's comments. I also do want to thank our virtual team. They've done a fantastic job. A lot of time went into this in the last month. We had several other Zoom meetings to ourselves, getting used to the software, knowing how it functions so that we can handle all these mic passing and question taking. And they've done a fantastic job. Thanks again to our speakers, Henry, Dave, and Ron. Great sessions. I think you answered so many questions that all of us were asking, and it's good to have this flow of information. It's awesome. Great to see, exciting times, and thank you for all of our viewers out there today. Really exciting, as Andy said, to see so many people hanging on for 5 hours here today, and see that kind of interest. And really looking forward to doing more of this. As Andy said, seeing you in person. We're going to see what we can do once it's safe to do so. And we really appreciate all the support. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close our first ever virtual event out. Thanks again, and wish you all a safe, happy weekend, and keep thinking about the East Broad Top.